The Aryan Coalition Research Station, Seraph's Beacon, hung like a silver teardrop against the azure backdrop of Ariva, its glass and titanium observation decks glittering under the light of twin moons. From these decks, the ocean world's endless seas stretched to the horizon, shimmering with bioluminescent waves and the occasional breach of colossal marine fauna. For over a century, the station had served as the Coalition's premier cultural exchange facility, ostensibly committed to gathering interspecies histories, philosophies, and biological documentation. In reality, the station had gained an unofficial reputation among the 5 species of the Coalition. It was where one studied the whispered anomaly known as human unpredictability. Dr. Horlicks Thalick stood at his laboratory viewport, chitinous fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern against the transparent aluminum as he contemplated the latest communication from the Orion Chancellor. The message glowed on his personal tablet, its ornate diplomatic seal betraying the gravity of its contents. Project Scare Score. Rank each species by the level of fear they inspire in others. His antennae twitched with irritation. They wanted metrics for something as nebulous as fear? He shook his head, the light reflecting off his emerald exoskeleton as he turned back to his notes. The compiled life's work that had made him the foremost Thalick cultural anthropologist in the Coalition. His published volume, Anthropoid Instincts in the Coalition, had won him awards across 3 star systems. But humans remained an enigma, despite 3 centuries since first contact. "Excuse me, Dr. Thalick, the symposium begins in 20 minutes. Horlicks turned to find his research assistant, a young Thalick named Vrick, standing in the doorway. Behind Vrick loomed a human, Captain Elaine Reyes, the junior researcher assigned as Horlicks's partner for the Scare Score project. Reyes smiled, a gesture Horlicks had learned to interpret as friendly rather than threatening, though the exposure of teeth still triggered an ancient warning system deep in his thorax. "Thank you, Vrick," Horlicks replied, his voice clicking through his translator. "Captain Reyes, I trust you've reviewed the project parameters." "I have," Reyes said, stepping into the room with that fluid gait humans possessed. Neither the precise movements of the Thalick nor the gliding motions of the Orions. "Though I must admit, I find the premise somewhat amusing. Creating a fear hierarchy seems counterproductive to Coalition unity." Horlicks's mandibles twitched, his species equivalent of a shrug. "The Orion Chancellor insists it will help species integration. Understanding what each Coalition member finds intimidating about the others could theoretically improve diplomatic protocols." Reyes leaned against the laboratory wall, arms crossed. She was tall for a human female, with close-cropped black hair and eyes that reminded Horlicks of Arivan obsidian. Her standard-issue Coalition uniform bore the insignia of Earth's United Marine Sciences Division. "And you've been tasked with evaluating humans specifically?" she asked. "We are to evaluate all 5 species," Horlicks corrected, though he couldn't keep a note of apprehension from his voice. "But, yes, the human assessment falls primarily to me." Reyes smiled again. "Well, I hope we're not too scary." Before Horlicks could respond, the station's announcement system chimed. "All senior researchers to Cultural Exchange Symposium Alpha." Repeat. "All senior researchers to Cultural Exchange Symposium Alpha." As they walked through the gleaming corridors of Seraph's Beacon, Horlicks found himself unconsciously increasing the distance between himself and Captain Reyes. It wasn't a rational response. He'd worked alongside humans for decades, but the morning's conversation with his Thalick colleagues had stirred old anxieties. "Have you heard?" Vexel had chittered over their morning nutrient consumption. "A human technician caught a coolant pipe that burst in engineering, barehanded, temperature registered at -48 degrees. Should have frozen his flesh instantly." "What happened?" another had asked. "He just wrapped it in emergency sealant, reported to medical for minor frostbite, and returned to duty an hour later," Vexel had replied, his antennae quivering. The Scalan maintenance supervisor nearly molted from shock. Such stories circulated daily, growing more fantastical with each retelling. Humans, shrugging off laser burns, lifting weights that would crush a thallic exoskeleton, turning from cordial diplomats into berserk fighters within seconds. Horlicks had dismissed them as exaggerations. Now, tasked with officially documenting how scary the human is, he found those tales resurfacing in his mind. The symposium was already underway when they arrived. Representatives from all 5 coalition species filled the amphitheater. The avian Orions, with their resplendent feathered crests, perched on elevated platforms. The arachnoid Scalan warriors, standing rigid at attention along the walls. The telepathic Valeri mammals, seated in cushioned meditation pods. And scattered human delegates, interspersed throughout, seeming almost plain by comparison. Horlicks took his designated seat beside the Orion ambassador, while Reyes joined a cluster of humans near the podium. The symposium proceeded with the usual academic presentations, tedious analyses of cultural artifacts, linguistic evolution theories, and historical reinterpretations. Horlicks's attention drifted until a commotion at the rear of the hall snapped him back to awareness. An elderly Orion statesman had risen from his perch, magnificent silver-blue plumage bristling as he addressed a human diplomat, though too distant to hear the exchange. Horlicks observed the human's response, a brief sentence, delivered without gesture or apparent emotion. The Orion immediately fell silent, feathers flattening in what Horlicks recognized as a posture of submission or alarm. The statesman returned to his seat without another word. Within minutes, the incident had spread through the telepathic network of the Valeri attendees, who projected waves of unease that even non-telepaths could sense. By the time the symposium concluded, Horlicks's personal communicator buzzed with a priority message from the Orion Chancellor's office. Incident at symposium confirms necessity of Project Scarescore. Dr. Thallic, expedite human assessment. Field study authorized. Conduct immersive research with human subjects on Oriva surface. Report findings within 14 standard cycles. Horlicks stared at the message, his exoskeleton suddenly feeling too tight. Field study? On Oriva's surface? With humans? He glanced across the emptying amphitheater to where Captain Reyes stood conversing with another human. She caught his gaze and nodded politely, unaware that she had just become the focus of his most dreaded assignment. The Orivan shore facilities sprawled across a crescent of crystalline sand, prefabricated structures anchored against the planet's notorious storms. Massive research vessels bobbed in the shallows, while smaller submersibles dotted the docks. When Horlicks's shuttle touched down on the landing pad, the facility's rhythmic warning klaxons were already sounding, the first bands of a seasonal tempest approaching from the horizon. Captain Reyes waited on the tarmac, the wind whipping her uniform around her athletic frame. Beside her stood a stocky human male, whom she introduced as Petty Officer Marcus Nung, the facility's dive coordinator. Neither seemed concerned by the darkening sky or the increasingly violent waves crashing against the shoreline barriers. "Welcome to paradise, Dr. Thallic." Ung grinned, extending a hand in the human greeting ritual that Horlicks had never quite mastered. "Captain Reyes tells me you're here to study how terrifying we are. Couldn't have picked a better day. Nothing like an Orivan hurricane to bring out the best in us." Horlicks accepted the handshake gingerly, conscious of the fragility of his finger joints compared to the human's robust digits. "I am conducting a comprehensive analysis of interspecies intimidation factors. Humans are merely one component of—" A thunderous crack split the air as lightning struck one of the facility's lightning rods. Both humans laughed, an utterly incongruous response that made Horlicks's antennae stand rigid with confusion. "Sorry," Reyes said, noting his reaction. "We've got a dive scheduled despite the weather. The storm creates perfect conditions for observing deep-water bioluminescence. You're welcome to join the observation team." "In this?" Horlicks gestured toward the churning sea. Best time to collect data, Ung replied, already striding toward the main facility. The Arevan Leviathan surfaced during electrical storms. Been trying to tag one for months. Horlicks followed, his thoughts racing. The casual dismissal of danger was precisely the behavioral pattern his colleagues had described, the seemingly pathological human tendency to confront rather than avoid threats. A perfect first observation for his study. Inside the facility's preparation bay, a team of humans donned specialized dive suits designed to withstand the crushing pressures of Areva's depths. Horlicks observed from a safe distance as Ung briefed the team on dive parameters, emergency protocols, and contingency plans. The methodical nature of the briefing surprised him. It suggested that humans weren't simply reckless, but calculated in their risk-taking. "We've got a submersible prepped for you," Reyes told Horlicks, handing him a tablet displaying the vessel's specs. "Reinforced viewport, pressure tested to 200 bar. You'll have the best seat in the house without getting wet. 200 bar would implode my exoskeleton at approximately 50% of that threshold," Horlicks noted dryly. Reyes smiled. "The submersible maintains internal pressure at standard atmospheric levels. You'll be perfectly safe. And if the submersible fails, then we'll have an interesting addition to your research data, won't we?" She winked. Another human gesture Horlicks had learned indicated humor, though he found nothing amusing about the prospect of explosive decompression. Against his better judgment, Horlicks soon found himself seated in the observation chamber of a sleek submersible, descending into the storm-tossed waters of Areva. Captain Reyes piloted the craft with casual expertise, one hand on the controls, while the other adjusted the vessel's sensor array. Beyond the viewport, flashes of lightning illuminated swirling currents and darting schools of bioluminescent creatures. "We're approaching the Leviathan feeding grounds," Reyes announced, reducing their speed. "Nung's team will be deploying from the main vessel about half a kilometer east of our position." Horlicks examined his surroundings with a mixture of scientific curiosity and mounting unease. The submersible, though expertly engineered, seemed fragile against the immensity of the alien ocean. Each surge of the tempest above sent pressure waves that made the hull creak ominously. "May I ask you something, Captain?" he ventured, needing to fill the silence with something other than the sounds of straining metal. "Elaine, please," she corrected. "And of course." The stories circulating on Seraph's beacon. Humans surviving conditions that would kill other species. Displaying strength beyond your frame. Are they exaggerated? She considered the question, eyes still on the control panel. Some, certainly. Humans love a good story, and details tend to grow with each retelling. But our physiology is adaptable in ways that surprise even us sometimes. We evolved on a planet with extreme environmental variations, everything from Arctic tundra to scorching deserts. Natural selection favored those who could endure. Before Horlicks could respond, the submersible's proximity alarm blared. On the external cameras, a massive shadow passed overhead, the distinctive serpentine form of an Arevan Leviathan, its armored scales refracting the bioluminescence of smaller creatures caught in its wake. "Perfect timing," Reyes murmured, adjusting their position to track the creature, marking its trajectory for Ung's team. What happened next occurred with such suddenness that Horlicks's visual processors barely registered the sequence. A second alarm sounded, not proximity, but structural integrity. A hairline fracture appeared on the viewport, a spiderweb of fissures, spreading with each passing second. "Pressure differential!" Horlicks chittered, instinct overwhelming training as he scrabbled backward in his seat. "We need to surface immediately!" But Reyes was already in motion, her movements a blur as she simultaneously activated the emergency ascent protocols, transmitted their coordinates to the main vessel, and seized an emergency repair kit from beneath her console. With methodical precision, she applied a specialized polymer to the spreading cracks. her fingers never hesitating despite the knowledge that failure meant certain death. "Integrity holding at 78%, she reported calmly. "We'll reach safe pressure zones in approximately 40 seconds. "Are you injured, Dr. Thalick?" Horlicks realized he was trembling, his exoskeleton vibrating with an instinctual fear response. Negative, he managed. "But you? How are you so composed? The viewport nearly failed completely." Reyes shrugged. "Part of the job. Besides, this isn't my first emergency ascent." She tapped the viewport where her repairs had halted the fracturing. "I've been in situations far worse than a little structural weakness." As the submersible broke the surface, rocking violently in the storm-churned waves, Horlicks made his first field notation on his tablet. "Human response to life-threatening crisis. Immediate action without apparent fear response. Subject maintained cognitive function under extreme duress. Displays casual attitude toward near-death experience afterward. Preliminary assessment. Deeply unsettling." Back at the shore facility, the dive team had returned with their own story. An attempted tagging of the Leviathan had gone awry when the creature, previously documented as docile, had suddenly charged their position. Petty Officer Ung had deployed an emergency railgun, firing a concussive round that stunned the creature long enough for the team to retreat. "Got some incredible biometric data, though," Ung reported enthusiastically, displaying readings on the central holotable. "Heart rate, neural activity, reaction to electrical stimuli, worth every second of the danger." "You could have been killed," Horlicks stated, still processing his own near miss. The assembled humans exchanged glances that Horlicks couldn't interpret. Something between amusement and puzzlement. "That's true of most worthwhile research," one of the divers commented. "We take precautions, but some risks are necessary for progress." That evening, alone in his assigned quarters, Horlicks reviewed his notes from the day's observations. The casual disregard for personal safety, the rapid response to crisis, the apparent lack of post-traumatic stress, all consistent with the anecdotal reports that had circulated on Seraph's beacon. But seeing these traits firsthand had affected him more deeply than expected. His personal communicator chimed with another message from the Orion Chancellor. "Preliminary scare score results required for diplomatic briefing. Data on human resilience metrics urgently needed." Horlicks's mandibles clicked with frustration. He had barely begun his fieldwork, and already the political machinery was demanding results. Should he exaggerate human capabilities to satisfy the Orion leadership's apparent desire to portray humans as fearsome, or maintain scientific integrity at the potential cost of his career advancement? His deliberation was interrupted by a knock at his door. Captain Reyes stood in the corridor, now dressed in casual attire rather than her uniform. "Some of us are gathering for a small celebration," she said. "Local staff and a few visitors from Earth. Thought you might want to join. Excellent opportunity for your research." Horlicks hesitated, exhaustion warring with scientific curiosity. "What are you celebrating?" "Marcus's sister just had a baby back on Earth. We're having a traditional family gathering in his honor," she smiled. "There'll be songs, stories, the kinds of cultural exchanges your project is supposed to document." Unable to formulate a valid reason to decline, Horlicks found himself following Reyes to a spacious common area where approximately 20 humans had assembled. Soft lighting illuminated a makeshift stage where various musical instruments waited. The air smelled of unfamiliar spices and fermented beverages, human comfort foods prepared for the occasion. Petty Officer Ung greeted them with glasses of amber liquid. "Dr. Thalick, glad you could join us. Have you ever tried whiskey? This is from my family's distillery in New Malaysia." Horlicks politely declined, knowing that human intoxicants could have unpredictable effects on Thalick physiology. Instead, he positioned himself at the periphery of the gathering, activating his tablet's discrete recording function to document the social dynamics. The celebration began with food and casual conversation, then evolved into something Horlicks found unexpectedly captivating: storytelling. One by one, members of the dive team took to the small stage to share tales, some clearly fictional, others apparently drawn from family histories. Many centered around oceanic adventures, accounts of ancestors who had sailed Earth's seas centuries earlier. When Captain Reyes took her turn, her story silenced the room. "My great-great-grandmother was a whaler in the Northern Atlantic, back in the days before the Marine Protection Acts," she began, her voice taking on a rhythmic cadence. Her ship was caught in a hurricane that would have been classified as an extinction-level event by today's standards. 3 days they fought those waves, lashed to whatever would hold them as the ocean tried to claim them. Horlicks's antennae quivered as he recorded the subtle changes in the humans' postures. They leaned forward collectively, eyes bright with interest, rather than fear, at the description of mortal peril. On the 4th day, Reyes continued, they found themselves in the eye of the storm. Calm waters, blue sky overhead, and surrounding them, a pod of the very whales they had been hunting. The matriarch of the pod approached the ship. My ancestor swore the whale looked her in the eye, with what she could only describe as compassion. The pod stayed with them through the remainder of the storm, their massive bodies breaking the worst of the waves that would have capsized the ship. The assembled humans nodded appreciatively, some raising their glasses in a salute. Horlicks was struck not by the improbability of the tale, but by the evident pride in Reyes's voice. Pride not in conquest or survival alone, but in a moment of connection across species boundaries. As the evening progressed, Horlicks was invited to share a Thalic story in return. Hesitantly, he recounted a classical tale from his homeworld, a cautionary narrative about the dangers of venturing beyond safe territories. The humans listened politely, but he noted their subtle expressions of confusion or even disappointment at the story's conclusion, in which the protagonist retreated to security rather than confronting the unknown. Later, as the gathering wound down, Nung approached with a data tablet. "Thought you might be interested in this, Doctor. Training footage from our Zero-G combat program. All Coalition security personnel go through it, but humans designed the protocols." The footage showed human trainees in a microgravity environment, grappling with simulated hostile entities. What shocked Horlicks wasn't their physical prowess, though that was impressive, but their methodical approach to pain. The training deliberately exposed participants to controlled injury, laser burns, impact trauma, oxygen deprivation. The humans learned by enduring, adapting to each new threshold of discomfort. "You train by hurting yourselves." Horlicks couldn't keep the horror from his voice. Shrugged. "How else would we learn our limits? Better to discover them in training than in actual combat. The Coalition peacekeeping forces have the lowest casualty rates in known space because of these methods." That night, Horlicks added to his research notes, "Human cultural attitudes toward danger appear fundamentally different from Thalic perspective. They celebrate historical confrontations with lethal forces, commemorate ancestors who risked destruction, and deliberately expose themselves to pain for educational purposes. Most disturbing is not their physical resilience, but their psychological framework that recontextualizes fear as a resource rather than a warning." The following morning brought new complications. A delegation from Seraph's Beacon had arrived overnight, a Scalan military attaché led by Major Skal Arjan, a veteran warrior whose carapace bore the distinctive scarification of the elite guardians. Accompanying them was Valari advocate Ellen Mavrek, her silver fur shimmering with the neural amplifiers that enhanced her species' natural telepathic abilities. They confronted Horlicks in the facility's conference room, the Skeelan's mandibles clicking aggressively. "The Orion Chancellor informs us you are compiling a scare score assessment." Major Arjan began without preamble. "We find this project potentially detrimental to Skeelan morale within the Coalition forces." Horlicks's antennae flattened defensively. "I assure you, Major, my research is purely academic. Academic research influences policy, Advocate Maverick interjected, her telepathic projection carrying undercurrents of concern. There is already troubling sentiment among certain Skeelan factions that humans are being elevated to positions of authority beyond their experience within the coalition. Any official documentation suggesting humans possess superior intimidation factors could exacerbate these tensions. The subtext was clear. The Skeelan military establishment, long considered the coalition's premier martial force, felt threatened by humanity's growing reputation for combat effectiveness. A high, scare score for humans would only confirm what many Skeelan warriors feared, that their traditional role as protectors was being usurped. My findings will reflect objective observations, Horlicks insisted, though inwardly he recognized the political quagmire developing around his research. I have barely begun my field assessments. The Orion Chancellor expects your preliminary report within 8 days. Major Arjan stated flatly. We expect you will consider the delicate balance of coalition stability when compiling your metrics. After they departed, Horlicks sat alone in the conference room, mandibles working nervously. His scientific integrity demanded honest reporting of his observations, yet those observations increasingly confirmed the very narrative the Skeelan feared. Humans possessed a relationship with danger that other species found both impressive and deeply unsettling. His dilemma was interrupted when an alert sounded throughout the facility. The storm had intensified overnight, and a coalition convoy shuttling diplomats to Seraph's Beacon had diverted to the surface facility for emergency shelter. Among the passengers was an Orion statesman, the very one who had been silenced by a human diplomat at the cultural symposium. Horlicks was summoned to join the welcoming committee, where he found Captain Reyes already coordinating with facility security. She looked troubled. "We've received concerning intelligence," she murmured as he approached. "There may be Skeelan extremists among the convoy's security detail, a splinter faction that opposes human integration in the coalition. They specifically targeted this convoy because it carries the Human Council representative." "The extremists Major Arjan mentioned?" Horlicks asked, his earlier confrontation suddenly taking on new significance. "Possibly, though I doubt the Major is directly involved." Reyes's expression hardened. "We're increasing security around the diplomatic quarters. I need to ensure our defensive systems are prepared for any contingency." As Reyes departed to coordinate with her security team, Horlicks found himself torn between continuing his research and investigating this new development. If extremists were indeed targeting humans within the coalition, it suggested that the Scare Score project might have more serious implications than mere academic interest. Driven by both scientific curiosity and growing concern, Horlicks made his way to the facility's secure archives. Using his researcher credentials, he accessed the station's historical records, searching for any documentation of previous human-Skeelan confrontations that might illuminate the current tensions. In a restricted section labeled Incident Reports, Classified, he discovered a sealed holoprojector marked Captain Reyes, Log, November 2299. The date placed it approximately 26 standard months earlier. After a moment's hesitation, Horlicks activated the device. A red-filtered holographic image sprang to life before him. Captain Reyes, her uniform torn and face streaked with blood, recording a field report amid what appeared to be a devastating sandstorm on Ariva's rarely visited northern continent. "Emergency log!" the holographic Reyes gasped, one arm clearly broken and held against her chest. Exploration Team Alpha encountered Class 5 sandstorm during routine geological survey. Native settlement in direct path. Evacuation successful, except for one child. Location confirmed in central storm zone. I'm proceeding with rescue attempt against safety protocols. If this log is recovered without me, tell the family we tried everything. The recording jumped, damaged or deliberately edited, to show Reyes emerging from swirling crimson sand, her environmental suit in tatters. In her arms, she carried a small Orion child, its delicate wings protected by Reyes's own body. But what horrified Horlicks was Reyes's condition. Severe radiation burns covered exposed skin. Yet she moved with determined precision, her face set in an expression of calm focus, despite injuries that should have rendered her unconscious. The recording jumped again. Now Reyes stood before a rampaging native predator, a six-limbed creature with razor-sharp appendages that had apparently been driven into a frenzy by the storm. With her unbroken arm, she physically restrained the creature, the bones of her forearm visible through lacerated flesh. Her voice remained steady as she directed unseen colleagues to tranquilize the animal. Subject sedated, recording Reyes reported, releasing the creature as it collapsed. Minimal harm to specimen, requesting immediate medical evacuation for Orion juvenile. Priority Alpha. My condition is stable. The recording ended, leaving Horlicks staring at the empty air where the hologram had been. His entire frame trembled as his mind processed what he had witnessed. This wasn't mere resilience or calculated risk-taking. It was a willingness to endure catastrophic injury, to step deliberately into mortal danger for the sake of another species' child. The true horror of humanity suddenly crystallized in his understanding. Not their capacity for violence, but their capacity for sacrifice beyond all rational self-preservation. Horlicks was still in the archive room when the facility's emergency alert system activated, sirens wailing as security bulkheads began to seal automatically. The overhead announcement system blared, "Security breach in Diplomatic Quarter Alpha. All non-security personnel evacuate to designated shelters. This is not a drill." His communicator vibrated with an incoming message from Captain Reyes. "Scalin extremists confirmed aboard diplomatic shuttle. Moving to intercept. Meet me at Security Checkpoint 7 if you can safely reach it. Documenting this might be crucial for your research." Horlicks hesitated only briefly before making his way through the facility's emergency corridors. Whether driven by scientific duty or something more personal after viewing Reyes's log, he could not have articulated. When he reached Checkpoint 7, he found Reyes and Petty Officer Ung checking weapons. Not the standard non-lethal coalition peacekeeping equipment, but heavier armaments designed for extreme threat scenarios. 6 confirmed extremists. Reyes briefed him without preamble. They've taken a human diplomat hostage in the East Corridor. Local security is compromised. We suspect they had inside help. We're moving to extract the diplomat before they can execute their plan. Which is? Horlicks asked, his voice unnaturally high even to his own audio receptors. Based on intercepted communications, they intend to publicly execute the diplomat to protest human influence in the coalition. Ung answered grimly. They're broadcasting preparations on secure channels to Skeelan military frequencies, making a statement to their sympathizers. Why am I here? Horlicks asked, suddenly aware that he had no combat training whatsoever. Because you need to see what happens next, Reyes said, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that froze him in place. Your scare score needs to be accurate. Dr. Thalick, today, you'll see exactly how scary a human can be when cornered. They moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, Reyes taking point while Ung guarded their rear. Security feeds piped to their communicators showed the extremists had established a perimeter around a conference room in the diplomatic quarter. Inside, the human diplomat knelt at gunpoint, surrounded by heavily armed Skeelan warriors in unmarked combat armor. We can't reach them through the main corridor. They've set up kill zones, Reyes murmured, studying the feeds. There's a maintenance shaft that runs adjacent to the conference room. It'll be tight, but we can breach from an unexpected angle. The maintenance shaft proved even narrower than anticipated, designed for automated repair drones rather than personnel. Horlicks's exoskeleton scraped against the metal walls as they crawled through pitch darkness, guided only by Reyes's whispered directions. The air grew thin and hot, making his breathing labored. "Almost there," Reyes whispered. "Nung, we'll create a diversion at the far entrance. When the extremists redirect their attention, I'll breach through the maintenance panel. Dr. Thalick, you stay here until I secure the room." "And if you don't?" Horlicks couldn't help asking. In the darkness, he couldn't see her expression, but her voice carried a strange lightness. "Then, you'll have excellent data for your scare score assessment." Before he could respond, Ung's voice came through their communicators. "Diversion in 3, 2, 1. A tremendous explosion rocked the facility, followed by alarms and shouting. Reyes moved instantly, wrenching open the maintenance panel and dropping into the conference room below. Horlicks, against all instinct for self-preservation, peered through the opening. What he witnessed in the next 90 seconds would fundamentally reshape his understanding of humanity forever. Captain Reyes landed in the center of the conference room, directly between two Skeelan warriors. Before they could react, she had disarmed the first with a precision strike to the joint, where exoskeleton met weapon, simultaneously driving her knee into the second's thoracic plate. The extremists' superior numbers should have overwhelmed her instantly, but she moved with a fluidity that defied Horlicks's ability to track, each motion flowing into the next without hesitation or wasted energy. A Skeelan officer fired a burst from a plasma weapon, catching Reyes's left arm. The limb jerked backward at an unnatural angle, bone visibly fracturing beneath the skin. Yet, instead of collapsing or even crying out, Reyes used the momentum of the impact to spin toward her attacker, drawing a compact baton from her belt that extended into a crackling plasma staff. "Get clear!" she shouted to the diplomat, who scrambled toward a side exit where Ung had appeared to provide covering fire. Two more extremists converged on Reyes, their weapons raised. She activated her baton's sonic stun module, not aimed at her attackers, but at the ceiling panels above them. The metal plating collapsed, temporarily disorienting the Skeelans. In that moment of confusion, Reyes drove forward, her injured arm hanging useless at her side, blood soaking her uniform, yet her movements showing no sign of impairment. The lead extremist, a Skeelan whose carapace bore juvenile markings, indicating recent maturation, raised a vibroblade designed to penetrate exoskeletons. Reyes met the attack head-on, the blade slicing across her torso but failing to slow her advance. She activated her baton's maximum setting, the plasma field engulfing both weapons as she drove the extremist backward into the wall with enough force to crack his carapace. In less than 2 minutes, 5 extremists lay incapacitated on the floor. The sixth, the leader, held position near the primary entrance, a deadman trigger clutched in his mandibles. One final extremist had the human diplomat in a chokehold. "Another step and the explosive charges throughout this facility detonate," the leader chittered, his translator rendering his voice with mechanical precision. "The coalition dies today, along with its human corruption." Reyes stood motionless, blood pooling beneath her boots, her broken arm now hanging at an angle that made Horlicks's thorax constrict in sympathetic pain. Her face, however, showed neither fear nor rage, only a calculating focus that seemed to take in every detail of the standoff. "The Skeelan people are warriors of honor," she said quietly. "Is this how you honor your ancestors? Taking hostages? Hiding behind explosives? Where is the courage in that?" The leader's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. "Humans have no right to speak of honor. You infiltrate our coalition with your chaos, your unpredictability, your disregard for proper hierarchy. Then face me warrior to warrior," Reyes challenged, deactivating her baton and letting it clatter to the floor. "No weapons, just you and me. If your quarrel is with humanity, then let this human answer it." Horlicks could scarcely believe what he was witnessing. Reyes stood severely injured, facing a physically superior opponent with natural weapons. The Scalen's clawed limbs and venomous mandibles could tear through human flesh with ease. Yet, she had deliberately disarmed herself. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then, with a gesture that spoke of both arrogance and cultural pride, the Scalen leader passed the detonator to his subordinate and stepped forward, his combat stance lowering to match Reyes's height. "I accept your challenge, human," he hissed. "When you lie broken at my feet, your diplomat will follow." What happened next occurred with such speed that Horlick's visual processors struggled to capture the sequence. The Scalen lunged forward, mandibles spread to deliver a venomous bite. Reyes didn't retreat. She stepped into the attack, her movements so precisely timed that she slipped past the Scalen's natural weapons and trapped one of his primary limbs in a joint lock. Using his own momentum and weight against him, she pivoted, driving the extremist to the floor with a controlled impact that stunned without killing. In the same fluid motion, she spun toward the final extremist holding the diplomat, her broken arm suddenly whipping forward despite its mangled state. A small projectile, concealed somewhere on her person, shot from her fingertips, striking the detonator and shorting its circuits in a spray of sparks. Burst through the main entrance, weapon raised. As facility security forces finally breached the barricades the extremists had established. The last captor, seeing his leader defeated and the detonator neutralized, released the diplomat and raised his limbs in surrender. Only then, with the threat neutralized and all hostages secured, did Captain Elaine Reyes finally acknowledge her injuries. She swayed slightly, her face suddenly ashen, and collapsed to one knee. Medical teams rushed forward as Horlicks descended from his observation point, his entire frame trembling with the implications of what he had witnessed. He knelt beside Reyes as medics administered emergency treatment. "You knew your arm was broken in multiple places," he said. Not a question, but a statement of horrified realization. "Yet you continued fighting at full capacity. How is this possible?" Reyes's eyes, focused on him, through a haze of pain, finally permitted expression. "Compartmentalization," she murmured. "The human brain can temporarily override pain signals when survival demands it." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "I guess I proved my point for your research, didn't I?" As medics lifted her onto a stretcher, Horlicks remained kneeling on the blood-slicked floor, his scientific mind racing to process what this demonstration meant for his scare score assessment. They had told him humans would field strip a Scalen in seconds, a fearsome but comprehensible combat capability. What he had witnessed instead was something far beyond mere technique or training. It was a seemingly God-defying capacity to embrace agony and transmute it into effective action. In the aftermath of the assault, Seraph's Beacon dispatched a high-level delegation to the Arivan surface facility. The Orion Chancellor himself arrived, accompanied by the Scalen General, whose forces had apprehended the remaining extremist sympathizers throughout the coalition. A formal inquiry was convened to assess whether the human presence within the coalition represented a destabilizing influence that endangered other member species. Dr. Horlicks Thalick was summoned to present his findings. The Scare Score project that had begun as an academic exercise and evolved into something far more consequential. The inquiry chamber was arranged with the formality befitting a proceeding that might reshape coalition policy for generations. The Tri-Species Council, the Orion Chancellor, the Scalen General, and a Valari advocate sat upon an elevated dais, while representatives from all member species filled the observer galleries. At the center of the chamber stood a presentation podium, currently occupied by various security officials delivering their assessments of the extremist threat. Captain Reyes sat in the human delegation section, her arm encased in a regenerative medical sleeve, her expression composed but watchful. She caught Horlicks's gaze as he waited his turn to speak and offered a small nod of encouragement. When finally called forward, Horlicks approached the podium with a clarity of purpose that had eluded him throughout much of his research. His tablet contained the comprehensive data, annotations, and observations he had compiled. But he found he needed none of it. The truth he had discovered was etched into his understanding with perfect precision. "Esteemed counsel," he began, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into the formal diplomatic language of the coalition. "I was tasked with creating a metric for interspecies intimidation, what has been termed the scare score assessment. Specifically, I was directed to evaluate humanity's position within this hierarchy of fear." The chamber fell silent, the attention of hundreds focused on his words. "My research began with the anecdotal accounts that circulate among coalition species, tales of human physical resilience, combat prowess, and apparent disregard for personal safety. I approached these stories with scientific skepticism, determined to separate folklore from measurable reality." Horlick's antennae quivered slightly as he continued. "What I discovered through direct observation and field research was both more and less frightening than the myth suggested. Humans do indeed possess remarkable physical attributes, pain thresholds that allow them to function despite injuries that would incapacitate other species, adaptability to environmental extremes, and reflexes that can appear unnervingly swift to non-human observers." The Scalan general leaned forward, mandibles clicking impatiently. "We are aware of human physical capabilities. Dr. Thalick, what is your assessment of the threat they pose to coalition stability?" Horlick's compound eyes focused on the general. "That, sir, is precisely the question I was forced to reconsider throughout my research. The assumption embedded in your inquiry, and indeed in the original parameters of my study, is that fear necessarily correlates with threat. My findings suggest a more complex reality." He gestured toward Captain Reyes. "I witnessed this human officer sustain catastrophic injuries while defending a coalition diplomat. I observed her willingly place herself in mortal danger to protect members of other species. I reviewed historical records showing similar patterns of behavior extending back to humanity's earliest interactions with the coalition." Horlick's voice strengthened as he reached the core of his conclusion. "Yes, humans are terrifying, but their terror lies not in malevolence or aggression, but in their boundless capacity for compassion. They willingly endure pain that would break other species, not to dominate, but to protect. Their emotional anchor to concepts like valor and sacrifice transcends instinct in ways that can appear alien to those of us whose evolutionary heritage prioritized different survival strategies." A murmur spread through the chamber as delegates discussed his words. The Aryan Chancellor raised a wing for silence before addressing Horlick's directly. "You suggest, then, that human integration poses no threat to the coalition?" "I suggest," Horlick's replied carefully, "that human integration has already fundamentally altered the coalition, not through dominance, but through demonstration. They have shown us possibilities of courage and self-sacrifice that expand our collective understanding of what sentient beings can achieve together." He straightened to his full height, aware that his next statement might determine not only his own future, but potentially the course of coalition development. "My final scare score assessment ranks humans as the most potentially frightening species within the coalition, not because they might harm us, but because they challenge us to reconsider our own limitations. The appropriate response is not restriction or containment, but collaboration and mutual growth." The council deliberated for several hours after Horlick's testimony concluded. When they reconvened, their ruling represented a carefully balanced compromise. Humans would retain full integration in coalition research and peacekeeping efforts, provided they assisted in establishing interspecies safety protocols to mitigate shock factor for species with more fragile physiologies or different stress responses. In the medical bay of the Orivan Shore facility, Horlick's found Captain Reyes reviewing duty rosters, despite her injuries. She looked up as he entered, setting aside her tablet with a wince that betrayed the pain her stoicism tried to mask. "Dr. Thalick," she greeted him. "I hear your testimony was quite compelling." "I spoke the truth as my research revealed it," he replied, taking a seat beside her recovery pod. "Though I admit my conclusions differed significantly from what I anticipated when this project began." A half-smile crossed her face. "I guess I proved my point." "Several points. In fact," Horlicks hesitated, then continued, "I accessed your emergency log from the sandstorm incident 2 years ago. The Orion child you rescued? What happened to them?" "Talia." Reyes's expression softened. "She's studying xenobiology on Seraph's Beacon now. Wants to understand how different species can survive hostile environments. Says I inspired her career choice, though I think she would have found her way there regardless." Horlicks's antennae twitched with curiosity. "May I ask you a personal question, Captain? One not for my official research?" "Elaine," she corrected gently. "And yes, when you placed yourself between the extremists and the diplomat, when you continued fighting despite injuries that should have rendered you immobile, what did you feel? Was it the absence of fear that humans supposedly experience? Or something else entirely?" Reyes was silent for a long moment. Her eyes focused on some distant point beyond the medical bay walls. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of honesty that transcended cultural barriers. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Every human is. We feel fear as acutely as any species, perhaps more so, given our imagination's capacity to anticipate pain. The difference isn't in feeling fear, but in how we process it." She met his gaze directly. "For humans, fear isn't always a signal to retreat. Sometimes it's a challenge to advance, especially when others depend on us." Horlicks absorbed this revelation, his understanding of humanity shifting once again. "I would like to include your perspective in my final publication," he said, "if you're willing to contribute." "I'd be honored," she replied. "What will you call it?" "Humanity's True Scare Score, a tribute to compassion." Horlicks decided. "It seems fitting." As Horlicks departed the medical bay, his thoughts turned to his next steps. His role as intermediary between species had taken on new significance, no longer merely documenting differences, but helping bridge them through deeper understanding. Perhaps fear, properly contextualized, could serve as a pathway to mutual respect rather than division. Weeks later, as Seraph's Beacon rotated into Arriva's dawn, the station's observation deck filled with a multi-species crowd gathered to watch Earthrise. Among them stood a young Skeelan child, her carapace still soft with youth, clutching her mother's foreclaw as the blue-green planet crested the horizon. "Are they still scary?" the child asked, gesturing toward a group of human scientists conversing nearby. The mother considered the question, her compound eyes reflecting the distant light of humanity's homeworld. "A bit," she admitted, "but now we know why." On the opposite side of the deck, Dr. Horlicks Thalick stood beside Captain Elaine Reyes, now recovered from her injuries and resuming her duties. Together, they watched the gathered species, Orion, Skeelan, Valeri, Thalick, and human, sharing the simple wonder of a planetary dawn. "Do you think it will last?" Horlicks asked quietly. "This fragile peace we're building?" Reyes smiled, that distinctly human expression that had once triggered instinctual dread in Horlicks's thorax, but now signified something closer to camaraderie. "Building peace is a lot like facing fear," she replied. "It's not about the absence of challenge, but about continuing forward despite it." She nodded toward the diverse gathering before them. "Look at what we've already accomplished together. Imagine what comes next." As Arriva's twin moons rose to join Earth in the star-speckled vista, Horlicks found himself contemplating that future, one where understanding transformed fear into respect, and different evolutionary paths converged toward a shared horizon of possibility.